It was a week before Christmas, and Jessie had just finished her duties as a caregiver for an elderly friend in Stockton, California. The night was bitterly cold, and the time was just past 3 a.m. The streets were silent as she started her little white car, ready to head back home to Sacramento. The fog thickened around Jessie's car, swallowing the road ahead. The headlights pierced through only a few feet, revealing a swirling, ghostly mist. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine. The world outside seemed to vanish, leaving Jessie in an isolating cocoon of grey uncertainty and unease. Inside the car, Jessie adjusted her seat and cracked the driver's side window, letting in the cold night air. The fog outside was relentless, pressing against the glass like a living entity. Her breath formed small clouds as the heater struggled to keep up. The road ahead remained invisible, a winding path lost in the grey shroud. At first, the only sound she noticed was the low hum of her engine, a steady rhythm that provided some comfort in the eerie silence. But then she heard it, faint, yet unmistakable. Footsteps. The steady crunch of someone walking on the road ahead. Jessie frowned, her eyes darting to the side mirrors, but the fog obscured everything. She slowed the car slightly, straining to listen. The sound was distant, deliberate, almost too steady to be natural. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up her spine. Maybe it was her imagination, amplified by the suffocating fog and the unnatural stillness of the early morning hour. As the seconds ticked by, the footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing through the silence. Jessie's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Was someone walking in this fog? At this time? The thought made her shudder. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It read 3:20 a.m. Curiosity itched at her, but so did a growing sense of dread. She reached for the window switch, lowering it another inch. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it an unnerving stillness that amplified the sound. The footsteps were clearer now, deliberate and unnervingly heavy, as if whoever, or whatever, was walking had no concern about being heard. Jessie's heart began to race. She leaned forward slightly, squinting into the fog. Her headlights illuminated only the swirling mist, offering no clue as to the source of the sound. She licked her lips nervously, her pulse pounding in her ears. Maybe it's just an animal, she whispered to herself, trying to shake off the unease. But deep down, she knew this wasn't an animal. The sound was too measured, too human, or perhaps too deliberately not human. The car crept forward as her fear began to take hold. The footsteps, though unseen, felt as if they were closing in, and for the first time, Jessie wondered if she was truly alone in the fog. The sound of footsteps continued to echo in Jessie's ears, growing heavier and more deliberate. Her breath quickened as she kept her eyes locked on the road ahead, though there was nothing visible but the swirling fog. The world outside her car felt unreal, like she was driving through a waking nightmare. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. A shadowy figure running alongside the road. It was barely more than a blur in the thick mist, its movements almost too fast to register. Jessie's foot instinctively lifted off the gas pedal as her mind raced to make sense of what she was seeing. "What the hell?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure moved erratically, yet unnervingly fast. Its dark silhouette was tall, far too tall to be human. At first, Jessie thought it might be a trick of the fog, her tired mind playing games with her senses. But as she slowed the car slightly, she realized it was no illusion. There was someone, running just outside the beam of her headlights. The figure darted in and out of the edge of her vision, its long, wiry limbs barely visible through the dense fog. Jessie leaned closer to the steering wheel, her eyes narrowing as she tried to focus. The figure was dressed in black, its form almost blending with the surrounding darkness, save for the erratic movements of its limbs. Her curiosity battled with her growing fear. Who would be out here, running in this fog, at this time of night, she thought. It didn't make sense. She tightened her grip on the wheel, her knuckles turning white as her body tensed, and then the smell hit her. It was sudden, a sickening wave of decay that poured through the cracked window like an invisible force. Jessie gagged, slapping a hand over her mouth as her stomach churned. The air was heavy with the stench of rotting meat, so overpowering that it made her eyes water. As she turned her head back toward the figure, she saw it more clearly now. Its legs were impossibly long, its movements unnatural. The shadowy figure was no longer keeping to the side of the road, it was edging closer to her car, its presence a looming threat in the fog. Jessie's heart pounded. Whatever it was, she knew now, it wasn't human. As Jessie drove deeper into the fog, her senses heightened. Every creak of the car and rustle of the trees felt amplified in the suffocating stillness. The thick, grey haze enveloped her little white car, isolating her from the world around her. Her headlights barely pierced the murk, revealing only the road a few feet ahead. Yet, even amidst the unnatural quiet, she couldn't shake the growing unease that crept up her spine. The fog seemed alive, shifting and twisting as though it had a mind of its own. Jessie glanced at the clock on her dashboard, 3:20 a.m. The realization that she was utterly alone on this desolate road filled her with a sinking dread. Then, faintly at first, she heard it, footsteps. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, a trick of her ears in the silence. But the sound grew louder, deliberate, and heavy, as if someone, or something, was pacing just out of sight. Jessie rolled down the driver's side window slightly, hoping the fresh air would calm her nerves. Instead, she was hit with a wave of cold, damp fog and something far worse, an overwhelming stench. The smell was rancid, an almost physical force that made her gag. It was the unmistakable scent of death, thick and oppressive, like rotting meat left out for days. Jessie pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes watering as her stomach churned. Her grip on the wheel tightened as a shadow flickered in her peripheral vision. Turning her head slightly, she saw a figure running alongside the road, shrouded in black. It was too fast, too large to be human. Her stomach dropped as curiosity gave way to fear. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She pressed the gas, desperate to leave whatever was out there behind her. Jessie's breath caught in her throat as the figure continued to close the distance between them. Her car sped down the fog-covered road, but the creature, whatever it was keeping pace with her, effortlessly matching the speed of her car. It wasn't just running now, it was stalking her. The sound of its heavy footsteps grew louder, closer, and each thud sent a jolt of terror through her chest. As she glanced into the side mirror, the creature's shadowy figure loomed impossibly large. It was nearly at eye level now, towering over the car. Jessie could see its legs, massive, covered in thick, matted black fur, so long they seemed to stretch beyond the car's frame. Her heart hammered in her chest as she tried to process what was happening. The figure's movements were fluid but unsettling, like it was part of the fog itself, as though it could slip through the dense mist without a sound. But there was no mistaking its presence now. She looked forward again, her hands trembling on the wheel as she pushed the pedal to the metal, trying to outrun the nightmare chasing her. 60 miles per hour. 65 miles per hour, it was no use. The thing kept up with terrifying ease, matching her every move like a predator in hot pursuit of its prey. Jessie screamed in panic, her voice breaking the quiet of the night. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but she felt trapped, cornered by the creature that was gaining on her. Her eyes flickered to the side mirror once again, and that's when she saw it, the creature had reached her. It was no longer running beside the car, it was right next to her, its towering form just inches away from her window. Then, it reached out with one massive arm, its claws scraping against the car with a sound that made Jessie's blood run cold. The claws were impossibly long, at least 2 inches, black and sharp as knives. They wrapped around the side mirror with a force that made the car shudder. For a moment, Jessie thought the mirror might snap off entirely. A sickening growl rumbled from the creature, low and guttural, vibrating through the car like a distant thunderclap. It was as if the very air itself recoiled from the sound. Jessie's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She couldn't take her eyes off the mirror, where the creature's claws held firm. And then, it bent down, its massive form towering above her, its face coming into view. Jessie gasped, her body paralyzed with terror. What she saw was worse than any nightmare she could have imagined. The creature's face was a grotesque mockery of anything human. It had no snout, no real nose, just 2 skeletal slits where a nostril should have been. Its mouth was impossibly wide, stretched into a horrific smile, with rows of teeth so sharp they looked like they could tear through steel. The teeth were enormous, easily 2 inches long, gleaming in the dim light of the headlights. The smile was wide and mocking, almost as if it were enjoying her fear, knowing the terror it was causing. Its eyes were the worst part, glowing orange, like twin embers in the fog, burning with an unholy hunger. The creature's grin grew wider, its lips pulling back to reveal even more jagged teeth. Jessie could feel its gaze on her, heavy and predatory, and she realized with a sinking heart that it wasn't just toying with her, it was deciding how it would make her its next meal. Panic surged within her. She slammed her foot on the accelerator, pushing the car to 70 miles per hour, then 75 miles per hour, but still, the creature kept up, its claws still gripping the mirror, its wicked grin never faltering. She was going faster, but it didn't matter. The creature was still there, still at her side, still mocking her as if it knew she couldn't escape. In that moment, Jessie knew her time was running out. This wasn't just a close call. This was a predator playing with its prey. And she was the one being hunted. Jessie's panic reached a fever pitch as the creature's claws scraped against the side of her car. The shrieking sound sent shivers down her spine, mingling with the rhythmic thud of her racing heartbeat. She pushed harder on the gas pedal, the speedometer creeping toward 80 miles per hour. Her car roared in protest, but the towering nightmare still clung to her side, as if mocking her desperate attempt to escape. The creature leaned in closer, its hideous face now fully visible through the window. Jessie's breath hitched as she locked eyes with the glowing orange orbs, their fiery intensity searing into her soul. The thing grinned wider, its jagged teeth glinting even in the murky fog, and Jessie could almost hear the silent taunt in its expression, "You're not getting away." Tears blurred her vision as she screamed, clutching the steering wheel like a lifeline. Her voice cracked, raw and filled with pure terror. "No. Not like this," she cried. "I don't want to die." The smell of decay intensified, flooding her senses, and her stomach churned violently. The stench was suffocating, an oppressive reminder of the creature's inhuman nature. Then, as if tiring of its game, the beast pulled back its claws, its grin never fading. With terrifying ease, it released the mirror, its long, hairy arm retracting into the fog. For a moment, Jessie thought she might be free. Relief bubbled up, but it was short-lived. The creature moved back slightly, its massive form disappearing briefly into the grey shroud. But before Jessie could process what was happening, it lunged forward with a speed that defied its size. Its claws swiped at the car again, this time grazing the rear door with a sickening screech. Jessie's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she pushed the car to its limit. The engine roared, and the tires screamed against the asphalt as she veered slightly, desperately trying to shake the monster. She glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart sinking as she caught a fleeting glimpse of the creature, still pacing her, its glowing eyes fixed on her like burning coals. And then, without warning, it veered sharply to the right, disappearing into the dense walnut orchard that lined the road. Jessie didn't hesitate, she floored the gas, her car hurtling toward the highway. Her hands trembled, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Whatever that thing was, she wasn't about to give it another chance. Jessie's hands gripped the wheel, trembling, as her car finally hit the highway. The safety of the open road was a faint comfort, but her mind was still reeling from the horrifying encounter. The glowing eyes, the skeletal nose, the mocking grin, it all replayed in her mind like a broken film reel. She gulped down air, trying to steady her breathing, but the memory of the creature's rotting stench still clung to her senses. As the fog began to thin, her foot eased slightly off the gas. She dared a glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature still pursuing her, but the road behind her was empty. Relief began to creep in, but it was short-lived. Up ahead, on the side of the freeway, she saw a figure waving frantically. It was a woman, stranded next to a car with its hood open. Her silhouette was illuminated by the dim glow of her hazard lights, flickering against the lingering mist. Jessie hesitated. Every nerve in her body screamed to keep driving, but something stronger tugged at her, an overwhelming fear that the creature might return and find this woman. Against her better judgment, Jessie slowed the car and pulled over, her heart still pounding in her chest. She grabbed the portable battery pack from her backseat, steeling herself as she stepped out into the frigid air. The woman, middle-aged and visibly distressed, explained her car had lost power. Jessie nodded quickly, popping the hood and connecting the cables with shaking hands. "You need to leave," Jessie said urgently, her voice tight with panic. "There's something out here in the orchards." The woman gave her a confused look, but Jessie didn't wait for an explanation. As soon as the car roared to life, Jessie yelled, "Go!" Watching her speed off, Jessie jumped back into her car and sped away, praying the creature wouldn't return. The highway stretched before Jessie, the dense fog finally thinning into a pale mist, but her sense of dread remained as heavy as ever. The creature's grotesque face haunted her thoughts, and the lingering stench of decay seemed to cling to her clothes and skin, even though it had dissipated. She gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white, as she pressed on toward home, her mind replaying every terrifying detail of the encounter. Her body felt like it had been drained of energy, yet adrenaline still coursed through her veins, keeping her hyper-alert. Each shadow cast by the roadside trees made her flinch, and every gust of wind against the car felt like claws reaching for her again. The memory of those glowing orange eyes, filled with cruel intelligence, sent another shiver down her spine. As she drove, her headlights illuminated the empty stretch of road ahead, broken only by the occasional reflective sign or mile marker. The eerie silence of the early morning hours was oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The radio was off, and Jessie didn't dare turn it on, fearing any sound would mask the approach of something unnatural. Her thoughts drifted to the woman she had helped just minutes before. Jessie hoped she had driven far enough away to escape the creature's reach, but a nagging doubt lingered. Had she done enough? What if the thing had seen her stop? What if it followed her now, waiting for the next opportunity to strike? Suddenly, Jessie noticed something in her rearview mirror, a pair of faint orange glimmers, distant but unmistakable. Her stomach dropped as her pulse spiked again. With shaking hands, she pressed harder on the gas, her car surging forward. Whatever it was, she wasn't going to stop until she was safely far away. As Jessie neared the outskirts of the city, the fog had almost entirely lifted, replaced by the faint glow of early morning. Her heart still pounded in her chest, but the terror that had gripped her was beginning to loosen its hold. The highway was quiet now, the eerie stillness broken only by the occasional hum of a passing car in the opposite direction. She inhaled deeply, trying to shake the lingering sense of dread. The creature's face flashed in her mind again, its glowing orange eyes, its horrifying grin, and the mocking malice it exuded. She couldn't forget how close it had been, how its claws had scraped against her car as if testing her will to survive. Jessie gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing herself to focus on the road ahead. The memory of the woman she had stopped to help gave her a glimmer of relief. At least she had gotten away safely. But that nagging feeling persisted. What if it wasn't over? What if the creature was still out there, stalking the dark corners of the highway, waiting for its next victim? Jessie glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those terrible orange eyes staring back at her. Instead, all she saw was the empty road fading into the distance. She exhaled shakily, her grip on the wheel relaxing ever so slightly. By the time she reached the familiar streets of her neighborhood, the world was beginning to wake. The first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time that night, Jessie felt a semblance of safety. But deep down, she knew she would never drive through the fog the same way again. Some things were better left unseen and unchallenged. Jessie parked her car in the driveway, her hands still trembling as she turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying the rapid thumping of her heart. She sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, unwilling to let go as her mind replayed the events of the night. The glow of the early morning sun filtered through the mist, its warmth doing little to dispel the icy feel lingering in her chest. Finally, she stepped out of the car, her legs weak beneath her. The world outside was eerily normal, birds chirped faintly, and the neighborhood was quiet, still wrapped in the blanket of dawn. But Jessie felt anything but normal. Every shadow, every tree seemed to carry the weight of the night's horrors. She glanced at the car, her eyes darting to the side mirror where the creature had clung to her. Scratches marred the metal, deep grooves etched into the frame, a haunting reminder that what she had encountered wasn't a nightmare or a trick of the mind. It had been real. Jessie's eyes flicked to the horizon, to the direction she had come from, and a chill ran down her spine. Somewhere out there, beyond the safety of her home, the creature still roamed. Was it hiding in the orchards, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to cross its path? Or had it moved on, seeking prey elsewhere? The stench of decay seemed to linger in her nostrils, a phantom memory she couldn't shake. Jessie shivered and turned toward her front door. As she stepped inside, locking the door behind her, she knew this night would haunt her forever. No matter how safe she felt in the light of day, the foggy road to Stockton would never feel the same again.